Hey guys, today I'll show you a crime thriller TV series named The Glory, Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Previously on Season 1, the biggest cliffhanger from the last season was the death of Sun, one of the bully gang of 5 led by Park, who hurt and traumatized the innocent girl Moon during her middle school years. The green high heels and the wound on Park's foot all suggested that Park was the murderer. Before his death, Sun had made phone calls to Park and others. What did he say? The scene flashes back to October 17th, 2 days before Sun's death. That day, after buying a ticket to Russia, Sun walked out of the travel agency. Park's husband received a call from his assistant informing him that Sun had been trying to reach him. Sarah, who was stealing dollars from her own safe to meet Moon's money demand, received Sun's call first. Sun requested to meet with Sarah under the guise of exchanging currency, but it seemed like something explosive had occurred between them. Sun was eager to continue speaking, but Sarah was dismissive. An irritated Sun began to question Sarah about Yoon, the girl bullied by Park and her gang before Moon, asking if she was at the scene when Yoon fell from the building. Unfazed, Sarah hung up the phone. Next, Sun went to the house of the rich bully, Jay, scavenging clothes, wearing everything he could. No wonder Jay's wardrobe was a mess last season. Sun threatened Jay, stating he would expose his embezzled public fund accounts, and asked why he provided a false alibi for Park on the day of Yoon's death. If he wanted to keep it a secret, he should transfer money to him within 48 hours. Sun, dressed lavishly, left Jay's house, still on the phone, this time with another member of the bully gang, Choi. He asked Choi if she had gone to the tutoring school to look for Yoon on the day of her death. Then, surprisingly, he confessed his hormone feelings to Choi, suggesting they eloped together. This scared Choi quite a bit. Sun then called Moon. Although they were on the same side, Sun suddenly threatened Moon, demanding her to hand over Park's ID card ahead of time, else he would let Park and the bully gang deal with her. It seems that Sun now wanted to benefit from both sides. Moon just smiled, knowing her time for revenge had come. She did not comply with Sun's wishes. In fact, she firmly stated that Sun's crimes were enough for him to be dismembered. But Sun was confused by her words. Now, only Park's call was left. Sun thought, why not pretend that he already got the ID card and shock Park? So he arranged to meet with Park at 11 o'clock that night. This was all the phone calls Sun made before his death on the 19th. Back to the present, Park's husband, Ha, arrived at Moon's apartment in Eden Apartments. However, he saw Park there. The couple, meeting in this way, were both surprised. Ha glanced at the forced door lock and the wall full of photos. He asked Park if she had been very cruel to others in the past. Park knew that Pandora's box couldn't be closed anymore, but she took the initiative and expressed disappointment that her husband came to another woman's house, not feeling she had done anything wrong. After Park left, Ha entered the room to inspect. Unlike Park, who entered the room wearing shoes and tossing cigarettes anywhere, Ha knew to take off his shoes when entering, as this was basic courtesy. All of this was recorded by the hidden camera installed by Moon. Ha saw the photo of Park taking her daughter to an ophthalmology clinic, and behind it was a photo of Jay. Suddenly, Ha realized he might have been cheated by his wife. At the same time on that day, Ju, who liked Moon and had decided to help Moon seek her revenge, went to the mortuary to find Yoon's body. After opening the morgue, he found it empty. Hearing the guard outside being reprimanded, he came out to intervene. Ju then learned that the body had been in the freezer all along, as instructed by the deceased dean, but the specific reason was unknown. Ju decided to become Moon's executioner. He visited his mother, who had just had surgery, and asked if he could use the scalpel as a criminal tool. His father was so kind, but he was killed by the prisoner he saved. He made a choice different from his father's, to avenge the girl he liked. His mother recalled the prisoner 3724, who kept sending letters about the killing to traumatize Ju. She felt that kind lies and blind ethical principles were just hollow glory. So she wouldn't oppose her son's choice, but she also cautioned Ju to be careful. Due to the involvement of drugs, the police finally began to seriously investigate Sun's disappearance. Jay, whom Sun worked for, was the first to be questioned. He took the opportunity to produce Ha's business card, claiming that Ha had been seeking Sun even before Sun disappeared. His gaze was always elusive, as if hinting to the police that Ha was using drugs. Park was hosting a television program. As soon as it ended, she saw Moon, who was radiating an assertive aura, ready to confront her. Moon had a fear of heat due to the bully trauma, but for the first time she ordered a hot coffee. She wanted to face her fear. As soon as she sat down, Park began to belittle Moon, her eyes filled with disdain. Upon hearing this, Moon knew that Park had been investigating her behind her back, but she remained calm, pulling out a video of Park picking a lock. Park was nonchalant, confident she could get out of the situation easily. Moon then revealed her old case file and a school dropout application form. It detailed the bullying by Park and her gang, but the case was closed with a warning and release. Park's face changed dramatically upon seeing this. Moon stated that due to her husband's politeness when entering her apartment, she was willing to give her one last chance. If Park took these documents to the police station, confessed and apologized to the other victims, she would stop her revenge. But Park believed she had done nothing wrong. She even thought that her bullying had made Moon stronger, saying if it weren't for her bullying, Moon would not have come this far. Seeing Park in this state, the last bit of guilt in Moon's heart was completely eradicated. The chance that Park's husband had won for her was gone. From this point forward, Moon was going to fully execute her revenge plan. Meanwhile, Ha began to doubt whether Sol was his biological child. Just then, his secretary told him that the police wanted to question him about Sun's disappearance. The secretary also produced a USB drive with a recording, saying that when Sun had called earlier, he had intended for her to convey some things. It was obviously not good news, so she had initially kept silent. On his way home, Ha listened to the recording. It turned out that Sun was hinting at his wife's infidelity. Listening to Sun's threats, Ha was furious. When he got home, he noticed bags from Jay's boutique scattered throughout the dressing room. Jay had infiltrated his life to this extent. To confirm his suspicions, Ha visited the boutique the next day. The store clerk naturally recognized him. Ha picked up a piece of clothing and entered the fitting room. He scrutinized the fitting room, missing no detail. He smelled the scene and got furious, as if he could see his wife and Jay's smelly hormone yoga was performed there. Meanwhile, Moon arrived at Ju's house. Ju was setting up a tent for Moon. Ever since her door was pried open, Moon had been temporarily staying at Ju's. She bought herself a tent, and to her surprise, Ju couldn't help but set it up. He even decorated it to be warm and bright. Looking at the tent, Moon was filled with emotion. There were no dark, moldy walls here, but bright walls that didn't bear the trace of hatred. She had unexpectedly gained such a life. To celebrate the beginning of their cohabitation, Ju even organized a romantic picnic in his backyard. Moon pretended to be calm and told Ju that she would also pay some of the rent in the future. Over at the bully gang, the four of them gathered again because of Sun's case. Park brought the challenge letter sent by Moon, the evidence of school violence from the past. Sun's disappearance had been transferred to a drug abuse case, and now Sarah was the most scared. She had no intention of thinking about bullying, in fear that the news of her drug use was to be discovered. Sarah pointed out that this matter only posed a risk to the celebrity Park. Before Park had time to feel disheartened, Sarah asked them if Sun had mentioned Yoon when he called. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, Park felt terrible. Everyone began to taunt Park because it was clear that Yoon's death was caused by her. Everyone knew it. At the time, because Jay made a false testimony for her, she escaped punishment. But now, Jay only had his child in his eyes. He thought it would be beneficial for him if Park got divorced. It seemed that he was going to take advantage of this. Seeing that everyone was making fun of her, Park could only use harsh words and crazy laughter to mask her inner unease. Truly, every person for themselves when disaster strikes. With a guilty conscience, Park called the former police chief, who confirmed again that the nameplate was destroyed by her mother, and the body in the morgue must be rotten. Park seemed to have taken a tranquilizer. She started laughing again. We know that the body was actually in the refrigerated room for unknown reasons. But isn't the nameplate in Moon's hands? It turns out that after Yoon fell from the building and the case was closed as a suicide, Moon did pick up the nameplate. But in order to uphold justice, she put Park's nameplate in the police station's complaint box. She originally thought that with the nameplate, the investigation would start again. However, the nameplate was not on the list of physical evidence because it was intercepted and stolen by the chief and ended up in the hands of Park's mother. Because she had a call record with Sun, Moon was also questioned by the police that day. Moon revealed to the police her plan to lure Sun to break the Yoon case. The nameplate she had was actually a fake, but through this method, Sun would definitely find Park. What Moon meant was that Park was related to Sun's disappearance. The police understood her meaning, but she had no evidence. Clearly, the police didn't quite believe Moon and told her that making false accusations was also a crime. Now, they just wanted to know about Sun's drug use. Seeing the police didn't care about the truly important matters, Moon was upset and didn't want to say more. She just said she would think about it. Moon went to the former school doctor's house to retrieve some materials. Because she calculated that Park would come to her house, she gave the only important document to the doctor for safekeeping. The file contained the investigation record of the Yoon case. It's revealed that in the winter of 2011, Moon had seen Yoon at the morgue. At that time, Yoon's mother grabbed Moon and asked her to help her daughter. Yoon's mother was a deaf-mute. The police didn't even listen to her properly. Moon looked at the investigation record and was surprised to find that Yoon was actually pregnant. Moon promised her to take care of her materials and assured her that she would seek revenge for her. Moon was taken aback by the extent of Yoon's injuries. It reminded her of when she was bullied and forcefully kissed by Sun. She suspected that Sun, the scum who got Yoon pregnant, would be the one to pay the price, and this was the basis of Moon's belief. Upon returning to Eden Apartments, Moon organized the photographs on the wall. After putting away all of them, she realized one was missing. It was the picture of the maid's abusive husband. In the parking lot, as the maid was about to leave after parking her car, someone knocked on her car window. Park had found her. It turns out, when Park checked the photos on Moon's wall previously, she found the maid's husband was the only unfamiliar face. So she had the police chief investigate. She suspected that Moon couldn't have done all this by herself and must have had help. The vehicle registration was checked too, revealing 2 cars, and this led them to the maid. The maid, not wanting to appear weak, took the initiative and threatened Park. Unexpectedly, Park mentioned the maid's daughter. Upon hearing her daughter's involvement, the maid softened and pleaded with Park to spare them. Park asked the maid to be her informant, knowing that the maid wanted to kill her abusive husband. She offered the same terms. She would help her kill him and would do it faster than Moon. But from then on, the maid would have to act according to Park's instructions. The maid seemingly agreed, turned off her phone, and fled with her daughter that night. Not knowing where to go, they drove around, but at least they were temporarily safe in the car. The daughter was happy despite their bleak situation. Although they had temporarily escaped from Park, Moon couldn't reach the maid. Moon had no choice but to reach out to Choi, asking her to lure Park to a specific location, Ju's cosmetic surgery clinic. Worried about Moon telling her dark history to her mother-in-law, Choi had to comply. Right after hanging up the phone, Moon was called by a colleague to the parking lot. It's Moon's mother who was frantically searching for her. Moon's mother had found her way there, obviously because of Park. Just a while ago, Park had approached Moon's mother, expressing her wish for Moon to be expelled from school. Initially, Moon's mother was protective, perceiving her daughter's job as a stable income source that shouldn't be jeopardized. But when Park offered money, the mother couldn't resist. Park told her that she couldn't spend Moon's money anyway, and she would give her more cash than Moon could ever earn in a lifetime. Moon's mother promptly agreed. She surprisingly knew Moon was in Simyong City. Apparently, Moon's mother had tried to find her at Eden Apartments but was turned away by the landlady. Moon brought her mother back home, a place that represented a lifetime of pain for her. At that moment, her usual calmness collapsed. More importantly, her mother had visited here in the spring. Moon asked her how she found this place. It turned out that her mother had just obtained a proof for blood relation. With this proof, she could easily inquire about Moon's address at the government office. Moon knew all of this was the work of Park, realizing that Park had already found the maid and her mother to use against her. Meanwhile, Choi successfully lured Park to Ju's cosmetic surgery clinic. Choi, clutching the Hermes bag that Ha had given her last time, told Park about the Go game between Ha and Moon. This information infuriated Park. Ju watched this drama unfold on the side and comforted Park at the right moment. With Ju's pleasant appearance, Park said she would visit when she had time for a beauty treatment. That day, Jay came to his boutique shop and asked the shop clerk to accompany him to buy Christmas gifts. The clerk suddenly mentioned that Ha had visited the shop a few days ago. This made Jay very cautious, and he immediately checked the surveillance. Although the surveillance from the day Ha visited was still available, he found that all the recordings before the 19th were gone. Jay said that the system was reinstalled on the 19th, so all previous surveillance was gone. Park had asked her to do this. Something must have happened in the changing room on the 19th. Moon was still looking for the maid, but the maid was continuously missing. She even wandered around the maid's house. The maid's husband, who was a drunkard and domestic abuser, was buying alcohol right next to Moon. Just then, her phone rang. It was a message from the maid. The two later met in the parking lot. The maid recounted her previous encounter for Moon to hear. Moon, however, was calm. It turns out, when noticing a missing photo on the wall, Moon had called the maid, guessing that Park would come find her, And sure enough, on that very day, Park found the maid. Fearing Moon would misunderstand, the maid hurriedly explained that she hadn't been bought off. Having fought side by side for so long, Moon truly understood what kind of person the maid was. The maid had been missing these past few days primarily because she was with her daughter. She didn't know where to take her daughter for safety. In the end, she entrusted her daughter to Moon. To avoid arousing Park's suspicion and continue acting as a double agent, she needed to be more careful. The maid said, "From today on, she will be Park's person." After saying this, both of them laughed. Moon brought the little girl to the school doctor's house and told her they would help her drop out of school and arrange for her to study in the United States as soon as possible. The girl voiced her worry about her abusive father going mad if he couldn't find her. She recalled that her father once said he would harm her grandmother and aunt if her mother and she ever dared to run away. This was probably why the maid was always hesitant to leave her husband. Moon reassured the girl to trust her mother, study hard in the United States, and enjoy the scenery when she's tired. These words were not only for the little girl, but also a message to herself, reflecting the maid's dreams as well. Moon and the school doctor were shopping and chatting about Sun at the supermarket. The doctor suddenly remembered that Ju had once shown her a surveillance video and asked if it was Sun. She had forgotten about it until Moon mentioned Sun. She then recalled that the police had questioned Ju. However, it was puzzling how Ju and Sun's paths crossed. It turned out that in early October, Sun visited the morgue to see Yoon's body on the same day Ju was there because a familiar patient had died. He had previously stated that if anyone came to see Yoon's body, they should inform him. Thus, he got Sun's contact information. Ju merely told the police that his father was the director of that hospital, and the case was special since the body was kept for an extended period. He wanted to contact the deceased's family, hence he reached out to Sun. In any case, since Ju was the last person to talk to Sun, his suspicion increased significantly. Moreover, considering the timeline, Ju was still working in Seoul at that time and had not met Moon again. How could he know about Yoon's body? At Park's house, Ha had been cold towards her. He didn't even reply to her message that morning. Park questioned her husband about why he met Choi. Ha's answer was simple. Sarah was on drugs, Jae was a hooligan, and Sun was missing. Considering this, Choi seemed like the most normal person he could talk to. He had been tolerating all of this for his daughter Saul. However, seeing that Park had no sense of guilt and only cared about her appearance, he was utterly disappointed. Ha was staring out the window when he suddenly had a thought. He took out the photo sent by Sun, finally realizing that Moon intentionally sent the photo to make him look for Sun. He immediately arranged to meet Moon at a hotel. Ha wanted to know Moon's entire plan. When they arrived at the bar, the waiter indicated that Moon could take off her coat. This time she didn't avoid it, revealing her scarred body, shocking Ha a lot. Moon then told Ha her revenge story, and the scars on her body were the strongest evidence. She honestly told Ha that she wanted Park to be alone and hoped that knowing this would make him leave Park. The successful man Ha was like Park's glory, and Moon hoped he could become Park's ruin. Interestingly, Ha said he didn't know why he wouldn't leave Park, but he told Moon that they should continue to meet in the future. At the same time, Park, feeling upset, unexpectedly sought help from Ju. It seems that a plastic surgeon indeed is a woman's best friend. Taking the opportunity of beauty treatment, Park wanted to have a dose of sleep anesthesia to rest a bit. As Park started to drift into unconsciousness from the anesthesia, Ju suddenly questioned her about what she had done to Sun. Park was startled by the mention of this name, but before she could answer, she passed out. In her unconscious state, Park's mind returned to 11 p.m. on the 19th. That day, Park had an appointment at the dressing room of Jae's boutique shop. Sun wanted to expose Park, revealing that she murdered Yoon. He was secretly recording their conversation on his phone when he suddenly received a call. He cursed and hung up, but his recording had already been discovered. It appears that this call was the last one made by Ju. Since Park realized that Sun was recording, she destroyed his phone in anger. Sun then challenged her about Yoon. He knew that Park was on the rooftop that day and said he had evidence proving she was there in his pocket. Park looked flustered and tried to snatch whatever was in Sun's pocket. Although she only pulled out a condom, her reaction gave her away. It was apparent that she was the murderer. Sun then demanded $1 billion from her. Seeing his smug face, Park was both scared and angry. In the heat of the moment, she grabbed a wine bottle and smashed it on Sun's head. After 2 hefty blows, Sun was knocked unconscious. Sun wasn't completely unconscious, and in her panic, as Park tried to flee, he managed to grab her foot. Park's foot was cut by Sun's ring. At this point, if she had called for help, he might have been saved, but Park chose to ignore him. She changed her blood-stained clothes and once again sought the help of the police chief to cover up her mess. Sun's body was later taken to a long-abandoned funeral home. Knowing Park's foot was cut, the chief ordered his men to get rid of the skin fibers under Sun's nails. No one knew better than him how to counter-investigate. To be safe, the body had to be buried, preferably on a rainy day, so the evidence would be contaminated. However, while handling the situation, the chief suddenly changed his mind. He decided to add another layer of insurance to his retirement fund and ordered his men to store Sun's body in the freezer. It seems this was the true story behind Sun's death. Afterward, Park woke up in Ju's cosmetic surgery clinic. She was still immersed in her dream, unable to distinguish if Ju's question about Sun before she fainted was a hallucination or reality. She rushed home in panic. Until the next day, Park still didn't figure out what happened in the clinic. She was scared that she confessed to killing Sun in her sleep. While lost in thought, Ju knocked on Park's car window. Park asked him if she said anything she shouldn't have in her sleep. Ju seriously said that she kept calling Sun's name but didn't reveal anything. Park was relieved. Next, Park tried to mend her relationship with her husband. She personally bought groceries and said she would cook. As for this gesture, Ha didn't give her any credit. Park questioned him about why he played Go with Moon and said it was infidelity. Ha did not defend himself and retorted that she was also doing the same with Jae. Park was taken aback, unaware that her husband knew it all along. Meanwhile, all the preparations for the maid's daughter's study abroad program had been made, and she was about to embark on her journey to the United States. However, the maid was being watched by the thugs sent by Park, so she feared that she wouldn't be able to say goodbye to her daughter at the airport. Moon's neighbor, disguised as a delivery man, helped Moon deliver a package to the maid. The maid, with a face full of injuries from her abusive husband, was a pitiful sight. Inside the package were the details of her daughter's study abroad program and her mobile phone. For safety, Moon suggested that from then on, they should use the daughter's phone to communicate with the maid. She had also put a red lipstick in the package, a gift for the maid because she had expressed a desire to wear red lipstick and a leather jacket while playing the role of a private investigator. The girl's flight was the next day, and despite everything, Moon still wanted to help the maid. The neighbor girl, who had some acquaintances in the underworld, was asked by Moon if they might be able to help distract the thugs keeping watch on the maid. The plan for the next day went quite well. Moon texted the maid to inform her of her daughter's flight time and urged her to rush to the airport. Just as the maid was about to leave, Park unexpectedly showed up. To avoid arousing suspicion, the maid pretended to be going out for groceries, but she kept glancing at the time. Park deduced that the maid was planning to catch a flight. Noticing that there was no luggage, she suspected that the maid's daughter was about to leave, which would explain why she couldn't find her at the school. In her panic, the maid pleaded with Park to let her daughter go, offering to do anything in return. Park asked if Moon had any other helpers like her, to which the maid replied that there was a man, but she only knew half the story and didn't know who he was. She promised to let Park know once she had more information. Park instructed the maid to continue tailing Choi and report everything she found out. Before leaving, Park casually mentioned that the maid's abusive husband hadn't been coming home lately, revealing that she had been giving him money to gamble. To punish the maid, Park decided not to give him any money that day, implying that her abusive husband would be returning home and she would have a tough time. As a result, the maid missed her chance to see her daughter off. The little girl waited at the airport for a while, but in order to ensure her daughter's safe departure, the maid had to give up on saying goodbye. Only Moon discreetly watched from a distance as the girl left. Earlier, the maid wrote a letter to her daughter's host family in the US, which she asked Moon to translate. In the letter, she stated that her daughter was the only source of joy in her life and asked them to take good care of her, which would be enough to satisfy her. Despite enduring the physical abuse from her alcoholic husband time and again, the maid was relieved when she received a text message from her daughter assuring her of her safe arrival. This was undoubtedly the greatest consolation for a mother. Now that her daughter was safe abroad, it was time for the maid to consider dealing with her abusive husband. That day, her husband came home drunk again. The maid feigned some worry, picking up her handbag as if to retreat to her room. Her husband, sensing something was off, snatched the handbag from her, discovering a significant amount of cash inside. He demanded to know where she got all this moment. The maid explained that a strange woman had given it to her, but she intended to return it. She said the woman asked her to send text messages, and it all felt suspicious. Her husband grabbed her phone and saw a draft of a ransom message. In reality, both the money and the phone were part of a trap set up by the maid and Moon. Her abusive husband was the type to latch onto anyone with money and not let go. Compared with a mother like the maid who would do anything for her daughter's happiness, Moon's mother was a terrible woman living off Moon. Now, she was living with a man in Moon's house, likely having gained access through Park. She even managed to obtain contact information for the parents of students in Moon's class. She started calling each parent for meetings, clearly seeking gifts. Park's mother was another type of terrible mother who only seemed to be protecting her daughter. It was unclear what her job was, but she had a wide network of connections. Even the morgue worker at Ju's father's hospital was under her influence. When Ju came to see Yoon's body, the worker contacted her, informing her that both Ju and Sun had visited the body. What's more, Yoon's body had been kept in the cold storage for 18 years, meaning it was still possible to gather evidence. Upon hearing this, she panicked and sought help from her old classmate, the police chief. She hoped he would find someone responsible at the hospital to cause trouble for. After giving instructions, she went shopping with a friend, but received a ransom message stating that the sender knew her daughter was a murderer. She was visibly flustered. The message was actually sent by the maid's abusive husband. This move seemed to be going well for Moon, eliminating two problems at once. As Sun's disappearance continued, others were making their own moves. Choi remembered Sun had a tablet that might contain some clues, so she retrieved it from Jae's car. Upon unlocking it, she found a voice recording from the night of the 19th, the day Sun met his fate. After listening to the recording, she was overjoyed, holding a piece of evidence of Park's crime. Jae, finding out that his shop system had been reinstalled, brought a hard drive to recover the data. Although he bribed his way to the front of the line, he still had to wait 3 days. If he could recover the surveillance footage from the 19th, he would have evidence of Park's crime as well. Meanwhile, Ju made excellent use of his wealth by buying the abandoned funeral home where Sun's body was stored. It's a decisive piece of evidence against Park. He told Moon that he had decided to help her unconditionally and be her accomplice. That evening, the colorblind Saul, trying on her mother's green high heels at home, asked the shop clerk if the shoes were green. Looking at the shoes, the clerk said there was also red on them. The girl asked where it was and if it was blood. This implied that the clerk must know something. That day, Park's weather forecast warned of a surge, capable of swallowing everything in an instant. But before a surge, the water would be calm. Now, everyone held a piece of evidence of Park's crime. Was the surge that would swallow her finally coming? The discovery of the abandoned funeral home is all thanks to the maid. She had previously trailed the police chief and found this place. She had snuck in twice on her own. Even though it was a defunct funeral home, the meter in the cold room was running fast, indicating something suspicious. Then, Moon shared the situation with Ju. She suspected that Sun's body was inside. After an investigation, they found that the owner of the funeral home was in America, so Ju used his wealth to buy the funeral home. After purchasing the funeral home, the two came to confirm their suspicions, but they were stopped by the caretaker. Upon hearing that Ju was the new owner, the caretaker was crestfallen. After all, he had taken money from the chief and illegally used the funeral home to hide bodies, which must not be exposed. The caretaker was initially ready to give up, but after Moon and Ju saw Sun's body and confirmed that it was the chief's doing, they didn't intend to call the police. Instead, they planned to make good use of the situation and turn it to their advantage. Seeing the body vacuum-sealed, Moon guessed that this body was a money-making tool for the police chief. It was supposed to be destroyed to erase evidence for Park, but the chief had other plans, which is why it wasn't destroyed. When Ju asked Moon how sure she was, she said 99%. The remaining 1% was due to bad luck or divine intervention. Hearing Moon say this, Ju was distressed. He told Moon that he would help her reach 100% certainty, but it would require Park to visit his cosmetic surgery clinic. It turns out that when Park came to find Choi, Ju noticed the wound on Park's foot. He later collected some of Park's skin tissue while she was under anesthesia. On the other hand, Park asked the maid if she had found out about the man helping Moon. The maid then revealed Ju's identity. Hearing that it was Dr. Ju from the cosmetic surgery clinic, Park felt a chill, realizing that she had been set up when she went to that clinic. Hearing that Ju's father was the director of a family hospital, Park became even more scared. This family hospital, which she thought was just an ordinary hospital, seemed to be quite crucial. Meanwhile, Jae received a USB letter from Moon. It contained photos taken by the perverted teacher at the school, photos taken under the skirts of young girls, including Saul. Learning that his daughter had been secretly photographed, Jae exploded with anger and drove straight to the school. Catching the perverted teacher, he let loose with a flurry of punches. This pervert deserved it because he always picked on Moon and even did such disgusting things. Moon didn't want to waste too much time on this perverted teacher, and using Jay to punish him was indeed a good choice. But how did Moon get this USB? It turns out that the perverted teacher also bullied other teachers at school. One of the bullied teachers, unable to stand his perverted behavior, finally began to fight back. Feeling that Moon was righteous, he gave her the USB containing the perverted teacher's secret photos. Saul, who saw this scene, was quite frightened and immediately called her father to tell him what happened at school. Jay landed in the police station for assaulting the teacher. The police suggested a settlement, but Jay was adamant that photographing under a child's skirt was a criminal act and refused to agree to any form of resolution. At that time, Ha and his construction company's lawyer arrived. They had prepared a settlement agreement for Jay, which left him dissatisfied. He felt it was unjust to reconcile with such a scoundrel. However, legally, Ha was the father of Saul, and Jay was a nobody with no standing to file a lawsuit. Seeing that Ha knew about his newfound fatherhood but still disregarded him, Jay was infuriated. He confronted Ha right at the police station, getting physical. For the first time, Ha lost control and retaliated. Their lawyers could do nothing to stop them. Because of this, Ha temporarily relocated Saul to her grandmother's house. Park found out about the situation from their driver and had a heated argument with Ha, blaming him for his growing indifference. Ha, no longer willing to tolerate, revealed how Jay had made a scene at Saul's school claiming to be her father. On hearing this, Park was dumbstruck. At that moment, her only concern was herself. Ha asserted that Saul was his daughter, even if they were to divorce. During this time, the maid's abusive husband continually threatened Park's mother, leaving her distressed and scared. The police chief, now emboldened with leverage from the discovery of son's corpse, got annoyed. The mother, not an easy person to deal with, confronted the chief, listing all the benefits he had received from her over the years. The abusive husband, preoccupied with his schemes, had been sober for several days. He fantasized about the life he'd have once he received his blackmail money, and even took his wife shopping for clothes, promising a vacation to the Philippines once the money was in. The maid felt conflicted. Her husband was finally acting like a decent human being, but she knew their plan couldn't end there. She hinted that Park had killed more than one person. Her husband's eyes lit up at the news, intending to increase the ransom. Previously, the chief had meddled with Ju's family hospital due to an anonymous tip about illegally stored bodies. The police arrived, demanding the bodies be moved back to the morgue. After Yoon's death in 2004 and the case was closed as a suicide, her body should have been cremated. However, Yoon's mother insisted she was wronged and refused to allow the body to be disposed of. The hospital director at the time, Ju's father, was moved by her plea. He instructed the doctor to keep Yoon's body in the cold storage, believing justice would eventually prevail. For now, he was willing to bear the risk for the weak. The current director, Ju's mother, met with the officer and challenged why they were investigating 18 years later due to an anonymous report of illegal body storage. She firmly refused to move the body back to the morgue, willing to face legal action, and urged the government to handle it. The truth about Yoon's case was still unknown. She wanted to uphold her late husband's pursuit of justice. After all, the police were only investigating due to the police chief's personal connections. With Ju's mother insisting on due process, they were in a weak position. Thus, Yoon's body was kept safe. Until now, Moon's revenge plan seemed to be going smoothly. However, she still had a ticking time bomb. It's her own mother who was provoked by Park. Recently, Moon's mother started to harass Ju again. It seemed that Ju had found Moon's mother. Perhaps not wanting to add to Moon's troubles, he ignored the harassment. At this time, Moon was preparing lessons at school when suddenly a group of parents stormed in, attacking her. Only then did Moon find out her mother had been extorting the parents in her name and accepting many gifts. The parents collectively reported Moon, and it looked like she might lose her teaching position. On a day of heavy rain, Moon came home angry and was disappointed when she saw her mother had received a lot of gifts. She picked up scissors intending to cut up the gifts, but her mother fought with her for them, even picking up a hanger and swinging it at Moon, scratching her face. Moon asked her mother to move out, but her mother said she could find her address with just one relative's proof. Moon would never be able to get rid of her. Being sabotaged by her own mother was like having a fire in her backyard. Moon had never felt so hopeless. Fortunately, there was still Ju. Knowing that Moon didn't want to talk, he gave her space and accompanied her, saying he would go to bed early and let Moon do anything she needed to at home. Despite her sadness, Moon had to pull herself together for revenge. She advanced her plan to deal with Sarah. With the help of the neighbor girl's underworld friend, Moon managed to buy all of Sarah's favorite drug paraphernalia. Sarah, having run out of her supply, was desperate and acting crazy at home, ranting about going to the Netherlands. Her parents felt helpless about their daughter, but wanted to keep her close. On the day of church service, Moon asked the underworld friend to set up the tools in the abandoned church of Sarah's house. Afterward, she anonymously sent Sarah a message inviting Sarah, who took the bait while being desperate for a fix. Moon then sent a message to the large church group telling everyone there would be an exciting show in the underground chapel, implying that the pastor's daughter was doing drugs there. Church members received the message and went to see the spectacle. At this moment, Sarah began to hallucinate, seeing the snakes on the wall move. Sarah seemed to see Sun. She crawled over to him and took off his pants. At this moment, Sarah remembered that she had done something unspeakable to Sun when she was high before. No wonder in that phone call before Sun's death, he said something about recording a shocking video of Sarah. Although there was no Sun in reality, Sarah was still making indecent poses in her hallucination. The onlooking church members took out their phones to record, and by the time Sarah came to her senses, her drug abuse was already exposed. Park, due to the maid's intel, also arrived at the church. She exchanged glances with Moon, who was standing by and watching coldly. Park asked if Moon did it, and Moon didn't deny it. But Park felt it was a waste of effort. This was Sarah's first offense, and she would soon be released. This move could not make her and Sarah completely fall. Faced with Park's provocation, Moon's eyes filled with determination. She suddenly warned her to be careful. Meanwhile, under Moon's arrangement, the neighbor girl reported online about an incident of school violence involving a certain weather anchor, Park. Attached was a handwritten letter from Yoon's mother. Park's phone was ringing non-stop. It seemed her school violence past was about to be exposed. Moon added that Sarah may be released soon, but Park won't be, because she had killed someone and it's not her first offense. Park, wondering how Moon knew all these details, asked if Moon had any evidence, but Moon answered she had more than just evidence. Moon's revenge plan officially began, starting with Sarah. Her drug abuse was widely reported and now widely known. Sarah gathered her passport and luggage ready to run. In order not to detect drugs in her hair, she even dyed it, including her eyebrows. But it was one step too late. The police had already arrived at Sarah's doorstep. Sarah was brought to the police station. The police wanted her to take a urine test, but Sarah knew they did not have a search warrant and refused to cooperate. She even saw herself as a victim and demanded her father hire more lawyers. Park also needed a team of lawyers. The school violence incident involving a female anchor began to ferment online. The maid intentionally left an anonymous comment saying this is definitely Park. The comment was immediately upvoted. Park's popularity was evidently not great. Soon her company was filled with people waiting to laugh at her. Friendless Park had nowhere to go and hid at the fortune teller's place. However, Ha was rational after all. They were a married couple with vested interests. Park was a public figure, and how this matter was handled could affect his company's stock. He coldly told Park that breaking up was his last strategy. Before that, they should try to solve the crisis. Ha then took Park to see the company lawyer. The lawyer asked her to circle the true content in the exposé article. Even in front of her own lawyer, Park refused to tell the truth. She said that without evidence, her denial meant it wasn't her. She believed the best response was no response. Ha was shocked at hearing this, not expecting Park would be so stubborn. Later one day at the Go Square, Ha ran into Ju. The two played a game of Go. Ha noticed his game style was similar to Moon's. Ju no longer avoided the topic, saying he had learned Go from his father since he was a child. Later he taught everything he learned to Moon. Ha knew that Ju was helping Moon take revenge, but he didn't quite understand. If he cared about her, shouldn't he stop her from seeking revenge to avoid losses? To this, Ju replied that among the things a victim loses, few can be recovered. Only honor and glory can be regained. Some people forgive, some people take revenge, but only by reclaiming these can one return to the starting point, no longer driven by hatred, and start a happy life. Therefore, he had no reason to stop Moon. Having witnessed the efforts Moon made for revenge, the two men agreed on the hope for Moon to regain happiness. It is often said that a suspect will always return to the crime scene, and Park was no exception. Provoked by Moon's confident assertion, she hurriedly returned to the changing room of the boutique shop to search for any clues. After a thorough search, she found nothing and sighed in relief. The surveillance footage was gone, time had passed, the body was buried, and the police chief who had handled the aftermath wouldn't talk. After confirming these points, Park felt certain that it was impossible for Moon to have any evidence, and she finally relaxed. However, she underestimated how fragile the relationships she had maintained with money really were. On the other side, Jay finally went to retrieve the analyzed hard drive, but the software engineer informed him that the hard drive was brand new, so there were no deleted files to recover. This deepened Jay's curiosity about what had happened in the changing room on the 19th. Just then, he received a message from Choi, who said she had some information about the missing son. They met at Jay's house, where Choi played the recording Sun had made on the 19th. Although it didn't capture any decisive evidence, it was clear that Sun had been threatening Park. Jay noticed the few brand names of alcohol Sun mentioned at the beginning of the recording. He realized those were the drinks displayed in the changing room of his boutique shop. Now, without having to recover data, he knew Sun and Park had been in the shop. After ensuring only Choi and he knew about the recording, Jay suddenly undressed and got into the bathtub, asking Choi if she was willing to raise an 8-year-old child with him. When Jay mentioned Saul, Choi immediately understood. She had always been interested in Jay, and took this declaration as a clear sign that Jay wanted to break with Park and ally with her. Choi was more than happy and began a romantic relationship with Jay, and the two of them blocked Park's call. However, Park had the maid as her spy, who easily found out that Choi was living at Jay's house. In Park's mind, Jay seemed to belong to her. She walked into Jay's house as if she were the mistress and encountered the usurper, Choi. Since Choi had some leverage over Park, she spoke with an air of superiority, flaunting her relationship with Jay. But Park, accustomed to disregarding Choi, continued to question her about the incident when she tricked her into going to Dr. Ju's cosmetic surgery clinic. Choi, however, was on cloud 9. After all, everyone was discussing Park's scandalous past, and she had evidence in her hands. She ignored Park's questions completely. Choi had always remembered how Park looked down on her, and she was ready to exact her revenge. Afterward, Choi visited Sarah in the detention center and deliberately provoked her. She told her that although Park's school bullying incident had been exposed, her drug abuse scandal was making more headlines. Even rumors about tax evasion through their family art exhibition had been exposed. She hinted that Park might be using Sarah to divert public attention from her own scandals. Clearly upset, Sarah was left wondering how much longer her sisterly bond with Park could endure. Meanwhile, Moon met with the clerk, who worked at Jay's shop and was also Park's assistant. In fact, the shop clerk had been bullied in high school following Moon. Moon only now revealed that she recognized the clerk girl from her first visit to Jay's boutique shop. She knew that the clerk had been living in the shop, but after the incident on the 19th, the clerk suddenly moved out. Clearly, the clerk had seen something on that day. She must have known about Sun's death. Moon could only hope that the clerk wouldn't do or say anything. It was their last chance to save their past. In Moon's eyes, the one who killed Sun had to be Park. Although from Park's current recollections, it seemed that Park did kill Sun. We had speculated before that perhaps the truth would be like in a murder mystery play. There could have been multiple people who wanted to kill Sun that night. The clerk girl was living in the boutique shop at the time. She might be the one who really witnessed the whole truth. But the so-called truth is still unknown, but with all the current evidence pointing to Park. During the day, Moon went to pay the apartment management fee to the landlady. She asked the landlady why she had helped her when her mother caused a scene last time. She said someone had to support her, which touched Moon. There are still good people in the world. The landlady understood Moon's difficulties and knew that family relationships could be tricky. She hoped Moon wouldn't bear everything alone. After all, even God makes mistakes sometimes. She reminded Moon to pay the management fee on time next month, which was her way of telling Moon to keep living well. While cleaning up at home, Moon found Ju's various torture tools and letters sent from the prison. It seemed like Moon was about to figure out Ju's story, but instead of confronting Ju, Moon surprisingly prepared dinner for him. Ju was overjoyed. Seeing the wounds on Moon's face healing, he breathed a sigh of relief. Moon asked Ju if things would have been different if they had met under different circumstances. Ju said that no matter the circumstances, he would have fallen in love with her. Hearing this response, Moon, who usually struggled to express her emotions, took the initiative to hug Ju for the first time, as if her icy heart was slowly thawing. Actually, Ju has been preparing his own revenge plan recently. He contacted a former colleague, secretly obtaining a certificate of qualification behind his mother's back. His aim was to apply for the position of a prison doctor in the prison where prisoner 3724 is held. Ju's father's case was quite infamous back in the day. The current prison doctor remarked that it would be difficult for him, as a relative of the victim, to be chosen for the position. However, Ju expressed that he wanted to carry on his father's legacy to save even the man who murdered his father, without prejudice. Although it's not clear if this was just Ju putting on a show, he did visit the prison and saw prisoner 3724 through the wire mesh. The prisoner was not taken aback, even saying that meeting Ju was the most interesting thing to happen that day. Suppressing his anger, Ju smiled at the prisoner, assuring him they would meet again. Only this time, he would show him the real hell. It seems Ju is prepared to kill without getting his hands dirty by becoming a prison doctor. Over at the maid's abusive husband, he has recently been threatening Park's mother so much that he even showed up at her doorstep. This indeed scared Park's mother quite a bit, but at least it kept him from being abusive towards the maid for a while. However, the maid knows that there's a world of difference between 0 incidents of domestic violence and innumerable ones. She can't afford to soften her heart. She must carry out her revenge plan. The maid, holding Yoon's birth data, pretended to seek the fortune teller's advice. The fortune teller, hearing about the childhood bullying, convincingly stated that this girl had a tough fate and suggested holding a grand spiritual ritual to resolve it. The fortune teller didn't even know that Yoon had been dead for a long time. The maid humored the fortune teller and expressed hope for the ritual to be held as soon as possible. On her way out, she ran into Park's mother, who had obtained comprehensive information on the maid's abusive husband through the police chief. It seemed that their plan was proceeding as expected. Park's mother had also come to see the fortune teller under the pretext of casting a spell. The fortune teller understood the underlying meaning, though. She wanted to kill this person. Initially, the fortune teller feigned moral indignation, saying she would be punished for such an act, but her eyes lit up when she heard about the reward of $1 billion. Meanwhile, the former police chief was also caught in Moon's trap. The abandoned funeral home caretaker, under Ju and Moon's arrangement, deliberately called the chief, urging him to deal with the body. The chief had no choice but to come clean to Park, confessing that he hadn't disposed of the body and asked Park to buy him a house in Hawaii. Hearing that the body was still around, Park panicked. She had also been questioned by the police recently. However, the chief's plan didn't go as expected. At the same time, the police received a report about a male body being found. From the tattoo, it's clear that it was Sun. Sun's body was discovered under the abandoned building where Yoon had jumped to her death. The implication was clear. The chief, who was still in the dark, arrived at the funeral home with Park to identify the body, only to discover that it had disappeared. The chief was even more panicked than Park at this point. Without his trump card, what would happen to his Hawaii villa? Meanwhile, Choi called Park to inform her that Sun's body had been found by the police. This was probably the darkest moment in Park's life so far. She was so angry that she took out her frustration on her bag right then and there. Due to her mother's acceptance of bribes, Moon was forced to resign from her teaching job at school. Fortunately, her purpose for being there was already fulfilled. Before leaving, she found Saul and apologized. Revenge would inevitably involve the children, who are innocent. This was Moon's only regret. After the incident, she gave her mother an ultimatum, asking her to move out, but her mother adamantly refused. She even blamed Moon for quitting her job and lamented the difficulties of raising Moon. Under the influence of alcohol, she knocked over the barbecue grill, instantly setting the house on fire. Her mother's lack of remorse became Moon's only solace in her despair, as her revenge plan also involved dealing with her mother. If her mother turned good, Moon might be swayed. Moon had installed cameras at home which recorded her mother's frenzy and the burning of the house. Thanks to the fire, Moon took her mother to a mental hospital. During the consultation, her mother's ramblings about her drinking habits easily led the doctor to diagnose her as dangerous and needing hospitalization. With all her information available, her mother was to be admitted immediately. Of course, she resisted, shouting to be let out and clinging to Moon. Moon retorted that her mother always said because of their blood ties, she can't get rid of her mother. But it's exactly because of their blood ties that she, as her mother's only relative, had the right to admit her mother to hospital. Moon then pushed her mother away and left without looking back. Because the Eden apartment was burned down, Ju volunteered to handle the aftermath. The room was scorched black. Ju went to a renovation store to pick out materials to refurbish the room. Coincidentally, he ran into the landlady who treated Moon like an angel. Even after what had happened to the apartment, she didn't say much. Ju felt she was being too lenient. The landlady told Ju that Moon had saved her life. However, when Ju confirmed this with Moon, Moon claimed she had no memory of saving anyone. It seems the landlady might have confused Moon with someone else. Meanwhile, Ha carefully read the school bullying expose about Park, which included a letter written by Yoon's mother. The piercing words revealed possible actions Park might have taken. Ha was shocked and rendered speechless. The article mentioned a girl who fell from an abandoned building and died. If it was true, Park would be a murderer. Ha confronted Moon to verify the truth. Moon didn't answer but handed him a note with the victim's address, which was Yoon's mother's house. When Ha asked about the location of the body, Moon told him it was at Ju's family's hospital. Ha had previously investigated Ju and was aware that Ju's family owned the hospital. He couldn't help but admire Moon's meticulousness. He asked Moon why she protected Seol. If she wanted to quickly deal with Park, Seol would be the best target. Moon responded that because he would also suffer. She knew Park was such a selfish person that Seol couldn't be her hostage. At this moment, Park is indeed struggling to avoid the trouble. She thought of Jae, who was the employer of Sun, and when Sun's body was discovered, the police indeed contacted him first. Upon hearing Jae say that the body was found at the spot where Yoon fell from the building years ago, Park was startled. Because of the recording provided by Choi, Jae had guessed that Park was the last person to see Sun. Only then did Park realize why Choi had been so arrogant towards her recently. Park tried to coax more information from Jae, but her reaction admitted her wrongdoings. Park knew that Jae cared a lot about Seol, so she said that they couldn't afford to let their daughter become a murderer's child. It was an accident that day. She asked Jae to help fake an alibi for her that they were together that day, just like the day Yoon fell from the building. Park's tactic worked, and Jae agreed to help her. They hugged each other, but each had their own hidden agendas. Park only cared about her own survival, while Jae was seeking to maximize his benefits while securing Seol. He consulted a lawyer and decided to abandon Park after learning that it was likely she couldn't escape legal punishment. Jae then arranged a meeting with Ha. He gave him a copy of the recording of Sun and basically figured out that Park killed Sun with a wine bottle. However, he clearly stated that he didn't want to involve the police. Ha asked him what he wanted. Jae asked for the custody of Seol. Seeing that Ha seemed unwilling to be threatened, Jae dropped another bombshell. He had helped Park forge an alibi on the day Yoon died. This confirmed all his previous fears. His wife was responsible for 2 deaths. After returning home, Ha consulted a lawyer who indicated that the exposure of this matter would be detrimental to his company. The implication was that he should sever ties with Park as soon as possible. Ha, being decisive, asked the lawyer to inquire about schools in England, planning to move abroad with Seol. The scene shifts to Sarah. With her family's financial support, Sarah was released on bail. The police investigation into Sarah has not yet ended, but she seems indifferent to her own issues. As soon as she got out, she showed concern about Park's situation and even asked her mother for the cell phone she used in high school. It was clear that Choi's previous instigations were successful, and Sarah blamed all her problems on Park and was preparing to take revenge on her. The phone that Sarah used in high school recorded a good piece of evidence. During their high school days, Sarah and Park encountered Yoon while hanging out. Yoon and Park were wearing the same dress, which Park wasn't happy about. She bullied Yoon on the spot, commanding her to take off her clothes and even threatened to kill her. If this video is exposed, it will confirm Park's bullying. Before taking action, Sarah met with Park and accused her of selling Sarah out to cover her own wrongdoings. Park denied it, but her attention was drawn to a bag in the cloakroom. Seeing Park dismiss her, Sarah decided to bring her down with her. Park's sudden interest in the bag was because the night before, when she and the police chief were at the abandoned funeral home to identify the body, she lost control of herself and became furious, and the charm on her bag seemed to have fallen off. If it was left in the funeral home, it could be a problem. Late at night, Park sneaked back to the funeral home to find the charm and ran into Ju, who was waiting for her. Park managed to slip away, claiming she was looking for the bathroom. But Ju expected everything and returned the bag charm to Park, saying it was of no use to him and reminded her to drive safely, especially in heavy rain as it's easy to hit pedestrians. His words held double meaning. Because of the lost corpse, the police chief knew things had gotten out of hand. He urged his sister to quickly sell off her properties and went to the hotel safe to grab the cash, preparing to flee back home. After making arrangements for his wife, the chief received a call from Park's mother, who wanted to meet one last time after a 40-year acquaintance. The chief agreed. Meanwhile, Park's mother withdrew $1 billion in cash and even had Park's real nameplate, which she handed over to the fortune teller. She made a request to the fortune teller who, obliged by the large sum of money, called the maid's abusive husband, pretending to meet up for a money transaction. The abusive husband was overjoyed at the prospect. Despite the heavy rain and darkness outside, he was only thinking of the money. Following the fortune teller's instructions, he unknowingly walked towards his own grave. At the same time, Park's mother and the police chief were driving on the highway. The woman was talking about manslaughter due to negligence and whether it could result in a suspended sentence. Just as she was saying this, the abusive husband, following the fortune teller's instructions, happened to cross the road. Park's mother hit him and he was sent flying like a toy. After confirming his death, Park's mother immediately called the police, claiming it was an accident and that the man had suddenly crossed the road. The chief, who had witnessed the whole thing, became her best eyewitness. However, having collaborated with her for many years, the chief saw through her deliberate act. She didn't deny it, but insisted that the abusive man was sent by the chief to blackmail her. She argued that only the chief knew how to threaten her, given the death of Yoon many years ago. The chief was stunned, but the woman revealed her trump card. It's Park's nameplate. She had kept it all these years as a safeguard against the chief. It was evidence stolen from the police and could prove the chief's complicity once tested. Meanwhile, Park, who was searching for a charm at the funeral home, received a text from her mother to pick her up at the police station. Thanks to the chief's testimony, the police treated the hit and run as an accident, and both were allowed to leave the police station for the time being. But the superstitious Park's mother first visited the fortune teller's place, who happened to be conducting a spiritual ritual. The loud noise made it hard for Park to ignore. Suddenly, the fortune teller seemed to be possessed by Yoon and began to converse with Park about the events of the day Yoon fell from the building. Terrified, Park thought a ghost had come. In reality, the fortune teller had encountered Moon the previous night after helping Park's mother. Moon was the actual mastermind behind these events and had a clear understanding of what had happened. She turned the tables and threatened the fortune teller. The hit-and-run incident involving Park's mother was born out of these people's greed. The ritual was likely performed for Park's benefit under Moon's threat. Faced with Yoon's revenge, Park was terrified. It turns out, ever since Yoon wore the same clothes as Park, Park had held a grudge. One day, she cornered Yoon at the edge of an abandoned building's rooftop. Yoon pleaded desperately, but to no avail. Park even forced Yoon to take off her clothes, but Yoon refused. She gathered her courage to confront Park, saying that in the past, she was only afraid of Park's money. Upon reflection, she realized that she was better than Park, who had nothing but money. This statement hit a nerve. Park, in anger, lit up Yoon's clothes with a lighter. As the fire grew, Yoon instinctively grabbed Park. Scared, Park pushed Yoon, sending her falling off the building. Coincidentally, Moon was at the scene that day and heard Park's phone ring. Having just killed someone, Park panicked. She quickly put on her innocent facade and downplayed the situation, claiming that Yoon had accidentally set herself on fire and fell. Park's mother only instructed her daughter to leave the scene quickly and left the matter for the police chief to handle. However, in her panic, Park left the lighter behind. Back to the present, following the recent death of Sun, the police questioned Moon again. Moon held her stance, insisting she had told the whole truth before, that Park was the murderer. They just didn't believe her. However, this time Moon emphasized the importance of testing the lighter for DNA. Back in 2004, it seemed no one had checked that evidence. Thanks to Moon's reminder, the police found the lighter from Yoon's case, which had never been tested before. Moon believed that with a thorough examination, the police could link Park to the crime soon. Back at the spiritual ritual, the fortune teller suddenly looked as though she saw something, speaking to the sky that the dead shouldn't be here, before collapsing and drawing her last breath. Her assistants exclaimed it was divine punishment and fled in fear. Park also fled in panic. As a gust of wind blew past, Moon, who was there to watch the ritual, showed no fear. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. At that moment, it seemed like the gods were on Moon's side. Moon had initially planned for the fortune teller to put on a show to scare Park, but it ended up seeming as if a spirit had really possessed her. After all, the fortune teller suddenly asked Park if she wanted her to take off her clothes, an exact statement only Park and Yoon staying on the rooftop would know. While it might have seemed odd to suddenly introduce the supernatural, considering Korea is a country steeped in religion, it worked. The series also explores the existence of God. For instance, in the first season, Moon repeatedly said that God was not on her side. By the second season, the landlady said that God was just a little late. Ultimately, God did help Moon. For those with faith, this plot twist could be seen as encouraging good deeds. On the same day, the maid received the news of her husband's death. After confirming the body with her own eyes, the maid collapsed in tears outside the morgue. At this moment, her emotions were a whirlpool of complexity. To have orchestrated the events that led her husband down the path of death was a tremendous burden for someone who still possessed a conscience, especially considering that for a brief period when he was sober, her husband acted quite human. But now, she and her daughter were finally free of the threat posed by this abusive man. Her daughter was truly saved. Leaving the morgue, the maid came across Park, who had just arrived from the fortune teller's place. Upon learning that her mother was responsible for the death of the maid's husband, Park became convinced that this was another one of Moon's schemes. She even used the maid's daughter as leverage to force her to back down, but the maid just landed 2 slaps on Park's greasy face, warning her against using the child as a threat and saying she too had Park's daughter's photos. Just as Park was preparing to retaliate, she noticed her husband had arrived. He had found Park through a couple of thugs working for the police chief. While Park pretended not to know them, Ha was not in the mood to play along. He gave Park 2 options: either apologize and accept responsibility at the victim's home, or end their marriage right then and there. To his surprise, Park still believed she had done nothing wrong and refused to apologize, leading Ha to lose all hope in her. He instructed his lawyer to begin the divorce proceedings. As a well-known figure in Samyong City, news of their divorce dominated the trending topics. Everyone quickly made their own responses. Jay instructed his lawyer to find a way to get his child back, while Ju became momentarily upset since his romantic rival Ha was now single. Choi was also worried that Jay might reconcile with Park, even going to Sarah to vent. Sarah, who was bent on dealing with Park, had no patience for Choi's rant, claiming that she was just their cheapest toy. This angered Choi, who had finally managed to turn things around with the help of Sun's iPad. She warned Sarah that she actually had a video to give her, but now, not anymore. Afterward, the maid, wearing the floral dress that her abusive husband had bought for her, scattered his ashes at sea. Her revenge was complete, and she was ready to begin a new chapter in her life. Of course, things were not entirely over yet. The maid ran into Park's mother, who was seeking reconciliation. However, she expressed her unwillingness to make peace. Park's mother had never met someone who would turn down money before and was puzzled. On her way home, she ran into Moon, who revealed that she knew Park's mother had murdered the maid's husband. She gave Park's mother an ultimatum: hand over Park's nameplate from back in the day and they could reconcile, or else prepare for prison. Moon handed her a phone, asking her to choose between protecting her daughter or using her daughter to protect herself, and contact her with her choice. Despite everything that happened with Park, she was still able to calmly go to work. However, as soon as she arrived at her workstation, her colleagues began to mock her. It turned out that Sarah had uploaded a video of Park bullying others in high school. Now that a video had surfaced as evidence, her acts of bullying were indisputable. Park was forced to resign from her anchor position due to the exposure of the bullying incident. Her biggest worry was her daughter seeing the video, but by the time Park got home, her daughter had already seen everything. Even Sol's classmates had started talking badly about her. Sol expressed disappointment in her mother, and she no longer felt pride in her. The words of her daughter finally had an impact on Park, who felt compelled to make a public statement. She admitted to participating in school violence in the past, but she denied any involvement in murder. Even now, she was still lying. She claimed with no shame that she was a victim and had kept silent to protect the reputation of her good friend Yoon. Now, out of options, she could only reveal the truth, that Yoon had killed herself because of a pregnancy. This was a rumor, yet some media outlets began to sympathize with Park. As it happened, the day was also the funeral of Sun. The old bullying gang reunited again, but the atmosphere was extremely awkward. Choi and Sarah were still quarreling. In a fit of anger, Choi used Sun's iPad to share a video of Sarah high and fawning over Sun in the group chat, which had been filmed by Sun. Sarah was humiliated by the video. Infuriated, she confronted Park, thinking she was the one who shared the video. When she found out it was Choi, she started fighting with her. Hearing that Choi planned to publicly share the video in the church, Sarah suddenly shouted that those who enjoy the pain of others were Satan. Choi was a Satan and she should get her punishment. She then attacked Choi with a pencil she had in her hair. Sarah's crazed actions were truly terrifying. Luckily, the police who had come with Park were there, and Sarah was arrested. She was about to stand trial for assault and attempted murder, and her father was arrested by the police for tax evasion and embezzling church funds. Choi received timely medical attention and survived, but her vocal cords were almost destroyed due to the injury to her throat. She could barely speak, apart from making a few chicken-like sounds, which seemed fitting as a punishment for her given that troubles often start from the mouth. Funnily enough, Jay could understand her chicken language. But now, Choi had lost all her value to him. He promptly proposed they break up, telling her that all the videos on Sun's iPad had been deleted, and there was nothing left to threaten him. Her chance at a big fortune flew right out the window. Choi was more furious than if she had died. Thus, it was game over for Sarah and Choi. Moon's revenge had taken a significant step forward. After learning about Yoon's pregnancy, Jae visited Ju because his father was the director of the family hospital where Yoon's body was kept. He asked about the condition of Yoon's post-mortem fetus. Upon hearing this, Ju understood. The child in Yoon's womb was Jae's, not Sun's. This was a misunderstanding by Moon. She'd been bullied by Sun before and assumed that Yoon was also impregnated by Sun. That's why Moon planned to avenge Sun. Unexpectedly, not only did Jae turn a blind eye to many evils, but he was also a part of them. In this regard, Jae was the one who slipped through Moon's original revenge plan, but he soon met his deserved end, which will be shown later. The investigation into Yoon's case was reopened. One day, Moon came to pay the storage fee for Yoon's body, only to find that Ha had paid it first. This could be his last act of kindness to Park. By now, Ha was ready to take Sol abroad. When he went to pick Sol up at school, he saw that his daughter was being ostracized because of Park's incident. Sol was worried that her father would abandon her, but in Ha's eyes, she was always his princess. The first thing Sol did when she ran into her father's arms was to apologize. It's heartbreaking that an innocent child felt compelled to apologize. Hearing his daughter's apology, Ha's voice choked up. Later, Park received a text message from Moon saying that the nameplate she'd lost years ago was found by her and handed over to the police. Today, she intended to make good use of this nameplate. Park arrived at the address mentioned by Moon, only to see Moon and Park's mother conducting a transaction. It was clear that Park's mom chose to protect herself and betray her daughter. Park arrived in time and witnessed this scene, causing Park's mother to fall into embarrassment. Moon handed the nameplate back to Park. As it turns out, this nameplate had no legal effect since it was not collected at the crime scene at the time. Park tried to take the nameplate back because she was guilty, but it was all in vain. On the contrary, now, through the nameplate, Park and her mother were estranged, which was a satisfying outcome. Park once told Moon that family members are the biggest perpetrators. Previously, Park's mother told Park to stay away from people with nasal sounds in their names. But unexpectedly, the person with the most nasal sounds was Park's own mother. In a sense, Park was indeed corrupted by her mother. The self-esteem that Park tried hard to maintain was constantly collapsing, and Moon also began to slowly accept hot food. Now, Park, like Moon back then, stood alone on the ruins. The revenge nears its end, and Moon began to put her relationships in order. First was the maid. Now, the maid has begun a new life and can go anywhere she wants. She no longer needs to assist Moon, and there's no need for them to meet anymore. Like long-separated comrades suddenly parting, the maid finds it hard to let go. Before parting, Moon asked the maid for some eggs she'd previously refused. Seeing Moon smile, the maid felt a pang in her heart. Such a beautiful girl who rarely smiles? It's hard to imagine what Moon has been through. But Moon has forgotten, or rather she's ready to embrace a brand new 19th year. Moon's another accomplice, the neighbor girl, received her car, and the remaining money from the revenge was all given to the school doctor by Moon. She believed that the school doctor would use the money to help those in need. Eating the eggs given by the maid, watching the people doing laundry, Moon suddenly remembered something. The reason her rent was cheap also had a backstory. When Moon worked at the bathhouse, she had actually seen the landlady. Moon had told her then not to do laundry here. Someone mentioned that the landlady lost her son to a drunk driver, and her mental health was not very stable. One day by the river, Moon came here in despair, only to see the landlady, who was also in despair. Moon immediately went to save the landlady. Two people contemplating suicide saved each other and embraced. The river was too cold in the winter, so they agreed to die in spring, where the flowers had to blossom. Throughout the revenge, the person Moon was most grateful to was Ju. Recently, Ju started to hustle for his own revenge plan. He visited the man number 3724 in prison. That day, he heard the answer he'd been longing for: why the prison killed his father. At that time, the prisoner was injured, and no one wanted to treat this murderer except Ju's father, the director of the hospital, who treated everyone equally out of his medical ethics. But before the operation, the director told the nurse to tell his son not to eat instant noodles. This sentence somehow raised the prisoner's desire to meet his own son. During the surgery, the prisoner woke up and could move his hand. The surgical knife was within reach. He thought as long as he killed the director, he could meet his own son, which led to the subsequent events. He successfully crafted a hell for Ju, who became even more determined to take revenge. Unfortunately, due to the victim's family's reasons, his application to be a prison doctor was rejected. His revenge plan was temporarily thwarted. One day, Yoon's mother suddenly fainted. Moon rushed to the hospital and unexpectedly discovered that the emergency contact listed on Yoon's mother's record was Ju. Moreover, the contact was listed before Moon began her revenge in Semyong City. Not long after, Ju arrived at the hospital. Moon confronted Ju, questioning if he knew all along that she had approached him on purpose. It turns out that Moon had identified Ju as the prime target ever since university, when she learned that Yoon's body was in his father's hospital. Except for the first time, she fainted and ended up in the emergency room, which was a genuine coincidence. Every subsequent encounter, including learning to play Go, was deliberately orchestrated by Moon. Little did she know, Ju had fallen for her. Even though he knew Moon had deliberately approached him, he pretended to be oblivious and played along. He had seen Yoon's body back then, and having seen Moon's student ID and noticing their similar ages, he guessed their relationship. Ju expressed his willingness to be used by Moon, but the one thing he couldn't understand was why Moon suddenly left. Moon explained that she found out about Ju's father's death and realized that Ju was also a victim. She wondered how she could use someone else just because she was a victim, especially when that person was also a victim. In simpler terms, she had developed feelings for him and couldn't bear to continue, so she left. After hearing this, Ju felt relieved and told Moon that if she left again, it would be a declaration of love. They agreed to carry out their revenge together. Now, only Jae and Park were left. Moon later found Choi, who had just been dumped by Jae, and proposed a revenge plan. Jae had glaucoma and needed to use eye drops every day. However, if glass water entered his eyes, his eye pressure would become abnormal and he would see nothing. She left the eye drops to Choi to decide whether to carry out the plan. After that, Choi came to Jae's house under the pretext of picking up her things. She was a bit hesitant at first, but Jae was still as arrogant and condescending as ever. So in anger, Choi swapped Jae's eye drops in the bathroom. Later, Jae went to school to find his biological daughter Saul. In front of other parents, he loudly proclaimed that he was her real father, completely disregarding Saul's feelings. Thankfully, Ha had already taken her daughter out of school. Unable to reach Ha by phone, Jae was so furious that he decided to go to the construction site to find him. On the way, he used the tampered eye drops and could not open his eyes due to the pain. At that moment, a cement truck crashed into his car. When Jae woke up, he was on the rooftop of a construction site, brought there by an unknown person. Unable to open his eyes, he was on the verge of a breakdown. Suddenly, a well-dressed man pushed him. During his fall, Jae opened his eyes one last time. All he saw was a floral tie before he fell into the cement pool, never to be found again. On the other side, Park, who had lost everything, suddenly received a video. It was the bottle she used to attack Sun. By the time Park arrived at the scene, the police were already conducting a forensic investigation. It turns out that the police had received an anonymous tip. The bottle that they failed to notice during the previous inspections had suddenly reappeared on the table untouched. It was as if someone had guided them there deliberately. Upon Park's arrest, Ha came to sign the divorce agreement with her. They officially divorced, and he proved himself tough. Before leaving, he went to a convenience store and bought a rice ball that Moon often ate as a memorial to their silent battle. The relationship between him and Moon had come to an end. Ha was now taking his daughter to the UK. The father-daughter duo happily boarded the plane, and Ha was wearing a floral tie. This indicates that Ha is the one who killed Jae. Later, Moon also met with Park. Park, all alone and still arrogant, thought she would be out of jail soon. Indeed, she did kill the person, so being in jail was no injustice for her. But what Moon wanted was to let Park taste a sense of injustice. Upon hearing Moon's revelation, Park lost control of herself and was subdued by the prison guards. This is truly ironic. A bad person will not apologize for their mistakes, but they will quibble about being wronged. What did Moon have done to wrong Park? It turns out, during Park's previous visit to the cosmetic surgery clinic, Ju had taken a skin tissue sample from Park's foot. In an abandoned funeral home, Ju put the tissue between Sun's fingers. Later, the police also verified that the DNA was an exact match with the lighter from Yoon's case years ago. Because of that, Park was charged with intentional homicide in both cases, and the evidence was irrefutable. Moreover, on October 19th, Park didn't actually kill Sun with the hammer. Sun, severely injured, sought help from the shop clerk, who was staying in the shop. By the time the clerk heard the commotion and came out, Park had already fled. Sun grabbed the clerk's ankle. However, this reminded the girl of the times when she was bullied by Sun. She saw this as a perfect opportunity and ended up delivering the killing blow to Sun. In high school, the clerk girl and Moon were good friends. But when Moon was bullied, the girl, fearing she would be implicated, severed ties with Moon. Unfortunately, she couldn't escape her fate of being bullied. This had always been a knot in her heart. One day, she found Moon and gave her a bottle she had hidden for a long time. It was the bottle that suddenly appeared at the crime scene and was used to convict Park. That day, the clerk also revealed the truth about Sun's death to Moon. But Moon had already stated that the person who killed Sun must be Park. Hence, the subsequent plan to frame Park was set into motion. To the perpetrator, Park, this is an injustice for her, but to others the result was satisfying. And those who had once assisted Park in her evil deeds, they too received their punishment. The police discovered the text messages between Park's mother and the maid's abusive husband. In the end, Park's mother was arrested for the murder of the abusive man. As for the police chief, on a rainy night when he was planning to flee, he was cornered by the thugs demanding the fee for their services. When the negotiation for money didn't go well, the rainy night turned out to be the perfect time to dispose of a body. Thus, he was dealt with by the very thugs he had once trained. Meanwhile, the officer in charge figured out that everything was a setup by Moon. But as Moon had said, she merely lured out the desires of these people. The ones who committed the evil deeds were still them. The police didn't hold Moon accountable. Yoon's case was closed, and she finally found her justice. Moon's revenge came to a successful conclusion. One day, Moon suddenly asked Ju to go see the sea. On the way, Moon laughed heartily for the first time. The two of them looked at the sea, drank, and had a heart-to-heart talk. It seemed like Moon was about to start her own happy life. However, while Ju went to buy more drinks, he received a farewell call from Moon. Once again, Moon had disappeared from him. She went to the rooftop where Yoon had died. She burnt all the bad memories and then stepped onto the rooftop. This rooftop, where she had stood 18 years ago, was where she had complained about the injustices of the world. Now, 18 years later, she was looking up at the sky, fulfilling her heart's wishes. She had no more goals to live for. Just as she was about to jump, Ju's mother suddenly called out to her. As if a divine intervention, Ju's mother pleaded with her to save her son, saying that she allowed her son to help her with her revenge. If she jumped, his end wouldn't be much different. Only then did Moon realize that the man who was always smiling had never let go of his father's death. 6 months flew by. Park's mother was sent to the same prison as Park. The mother and daughter duo became cellmates. Park finally experienced what it felt like to be bullied. The one who couldn't write scripts before had now learnt to freestyle. At a glance from the prison queen, she would quickly get up and improvise a weather forecast. Even when wronged and in tears, her voice didn't quiver even the slightest. She was surprisingly professional. As for Moon, in these 6 months, she had been doing volunteer work at a temple. Choi's prospective mother-in-law used to be a gang boss. Moon's perseverance moved her, and Moon finally asked her for a favor to transfer prisoner 3724 to another prison. After some thought, the boss agreed to move her to another prison, known for its harsh conditions. Ever since Moon left, Ju would habitually check the game board every day when he came home, hoping that one day there would be an extra piece on it. But he was always met with disappointment, until one day he came home to find an extra piece on the board. He knew Moon had been there. Seeing Moon made him feel wronged, but she said her departure was out of love. She came back this time to give him a special lesson in revenge. Moon said that this time she would be his executioner. Eventually, Moon accepted Ju's love. Up next, Ju successfully became the prison physician at the said prison, waiting for the prisoner to be transferred. Moon started tutoring again, as revenge does cost money. Plus, the child's father she was tutoring was an official in the Department of Corrections, which was beneficial. Moon later went to the prison as a reading club teacher. By the way, the maid opened a vegetable shop in her daughter's name. One day, she received a text message for a nanny job, apparently sent by Moon. The maid put on bright red lipstick and prepared to leave. Finally, due to a prison riot, the prisoner was successfully transferred. He was beaten to a pulp and was limping. He saw Dr. Ju, who had been waiting for him. 6 months ago, Ju had vowed to punish him, to kill him. But the prisoner argued that a doctor couldn't do that. But this oath only applies to saving humans, not beasts. Ju told him that one day he needs to be careful with every pill he takes, every bite of food, because he's a doctor and he won't be found out. That day was finally approaching. The prisoner was about to face his own hell. Moon also wrote a letter to the landlady. She realized that she was never fighting alone. Now she's back at university studying architecture and has also started scar treatment. Moon even got a tattoo on her arm, as if to tell the landlady that she will remember the spring, live well, and bloom in the spring. Moon brought flowers to Yoon to celebrate their mutual 19th birthday. The revenge couple's new round of revenge drama is about to start. But season 2 of this drama abruptly ends here. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.